always felt a little colder to Harry. Maybe it was the breeze slipping between the tall buildings, or maybe it was just the way loneliness clung to a man with nowhere to go. The sky was a faded orange, melting into dusky purple, and the streetlights were flickering to life one by one. People hurried past with purpose, coats buttoned tight, bags in swinging, phones pressed to their ears, and not a single one of them spared a glance for the old man sitting on the worn wooden bench near the corner of Maple Street. Harry had been sitting there for hours. He always did. It was his bench, or at least it felt like it. A place where he could rest his tired legs, lean back, and watch the world go on without him. His clothes were torn and faded, his coat too thin for the season, his gray beard tangled over his chest, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a paper cup of cheap coffee he'd bought with the few coins he'd earned cleaning car windows that morning. Life hadn't always been like this. Once, many years ago, Harry had a job, a small apartment, and even a family. But one bad decision followed another. A lost job, an eviction, a failed attempt to fix things, and now here he was, invisible on a busy street, a forgotten man in a city that never stopped moving. He sighed and rubbed his hands together for warmth. The city noises blurred into a dull hum, distant horns, footsteps, chatter, until a sudden thud broke the monotony. A black leather bag had landed just a few feet from his bench. Harry blinked, confused. He looked around. People were still moving, but no one seemed to have noticed. The bag was expensive looking, the kind rich businessmen carried. Maybe someone had dropped it rushing to a cab, or maybe it had slipped off a bench. Whatever the reason, it now sat there, unattended. Cautiously, Harry shuffled closer. His heart was beating a little faster now. Curiosity mixed with something else. Hunger, maybe. Hope. He glanced around once more. Nobody was looking. With trembling hands, he picked up the bag. It was heavy, very heavy. He unzipped it slowly, almost afraid of what he might find inside. And then he froze. Bundles of cash. Thick stacks of $100 bills, neatly tied and packed. There must have been thousands. No, tens of thousands, maybe more. Harry's breath caught in his throat. He'd never seen this much money in his life. Not even close. For a long moment, he just stared. His mind was racing. What if I kept it? He thought. I could buy food, a room, a coat that actually keeps me warm. I could start over. But another voice, quieter, deeper, whispered something else. It's not yours. Someone's looking for this. Someone might be desperate without it. Harry swallowed hard and zipped the bag shut. His heart was pounding so loudly he could hear it. He looked up and down the street again, hoping, almost wishing, someone would come running back for it. But nobody did. Minutes passed. The temptation burned inside him like fire. This was the kind of moment that could change everything. A single choice, and his life might never be the same. But so could someone else's. Finally, with a heavy breath, he stood. His knees cracked, his old boots scraping the pavement as he shuffled toward the nearest police station. Maybe they could track down the owner. Maybe they could help. But halfway down the block, he heard a voice, distant but frantic. Has anyone seen a black leather bag? Please, someone, I lost a bag. Harry stopped in his tracks. A tall man in an expensive suit was standing near the corner, spinning around, his voice trembling. His skin glistened with sweat, his dark hands gripping his phone tightly. He looked terrified, not the usual fear of losing something material, but the deep, gut-wrenching panic of someone who had lost something far more important. Harry clutched the bag against his chest. His heart sank. That must be him. He took a deep breath and approached. The man turned sharply as Harry shuffled closer. "Excuse me, sir," Harry said quietly, his voice raspy from years of cold air and silence. "I think this belongs to you." The man's eyes widened. You found it?" He reached out, almost afraid to believe it. Harry nodded and handed the bag over. It was by the bench. Nobody else saw it. The man flipped it open, quickly checking the contents. Relief washed over his face like a wave. He exhaled shakily and then looked back at Harry, really looked at him. And for the first time, someone saw more than a homeless man in rags. "Sir, you have no idea what this means to me," the man said, his voice soft and full of gratitude. This bag, it's everything. Harry just smiled faintly and shrugged. Didn't seem right to keep it. It's yours. The man paused, visibly moved. What's your name? Harry, he replied. The man extended his hand. Harry, I'm David. And in that single handshake, a story began, one that neither of them could have predicted. A story born from honesty, from a choice that could have gone either way. Harry had no idea that by returning that bag, he hadn't just changed David's day. He had just changed his own destiny. Harry stood there awkwardly on the busy sidewalk as David clutched the black leather bag tightly against his chest. The tension in David's shoulders slowly melted away, replaced by pure relief. Cars honked nearby. People brushed past them. But for a brief moment, it felt like the entire city had gone still. Just two men, from two completely different worlds, bound by a single act of honesty. Harry, David repeated, almost as if trying to remember the name forever. You don't know how much this means to me. Harry shifted uncomfortably. Compliments weren't something he was used to. Most days, people ignored him completely. On the worst days, they crossed the street to avoid him. It's okay, Harry muttered. I just did what anyone would do. But David shook his head firmly. No, most people wouldn't. Most people would have taken it and disappeared. There's over $200,000 in here. It's not just money. It's payroll for my employees, their rent, their food. Without it, people would suffer. $200,000. The number hit Harry like a punch in the chest. That was more money than he'd ever seen in his 70 years of life. He couldn't even imagine what it felt like to own that kind of money. And yet, he had just handed it back without hesitation. Guess I made the right choice then, Harry said with a tired smile. David's eyes softened. He studied the old man more closely now. The torn sleeves, the frayed edges of his coat, the scuffed shoes that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. This wasn't just someone who had done the right thing. This was someone who needed help, desperately. Harry, where do you live? David asked gently. Harry let out a small laugh, dry and bitter. Right now? That bench back there. Sometimes a shelter, if they've got room. Mostly the streets. David's chest tightened. How long? 7 years, Harry answered simply. Give or take. Life, it's got a way of knocking you down sometimes. I just never managed to get back up. David didn't know what to say. Here was a man who had nothing. No home, no money, no safety. And yet, he'd done the right thing when nobody was watching. That kind of integrity was rare. Precious. Come with me, David said suddenly. Harry frowned. What? Where? Somewhere warm. Somewhere we can talk. And get you a meal. I insist. Harry hesitated. He wasn't used to people offering kindness, at least, not without expecting something in return. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, David said firmly. In fact, you might have just saved my business. After a long pause, Harry nodded. All right. I suppose a warm meal wouldn't hurt. The two men walked side by side through the city streets. David's polished shoes clicked against the pavement, while Harry's worn boots dragged slightly, but they matched pace. People stared. They always did when someone like Harry was near someone like David, but neither of them cared. David led him into a cozy little restaurant tucked away on a quiet corner. It was warm inside, the air filled with the smell of roasted meat and freshly baked bread. Harry couldn't remember the last time he'd been in a place like this. Order anything you like, David said as they sat at a booth by the window. Harry stared at the menu, overwhelmed. Anything. Anything. It felt surreal. He ordered roast chicken with mashed potatoes, something he hadn't tasted in years, and when the food arrived, he ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was the last meal he'd ever have. David watched quietly, his mind turning. The man across from him wasn't just another homeless face. There was dignity in the way Harry spoke, wisdom in his tired eyes. Life had been cruel to him, but it hadn't broken him. Harry, David began carefully. If you had that money, what would you have done? Harry paused mid-bite. The question lingered in the air. I'd like to say I'd fix everything, he said after a while. Get a place to live. Maybe some new clothes. But truth is, money can't erase the past. It can't give me back the time I lost or the people I pushed away. Still, it would have been a chance. A chance to start over. David nodded thoughtfully. And yet, you gave it back. Harry shrugged. Because it wasn't mine. And because I've learned something on these streets. Money can change your circumstances, but choices, they define who you are. David smiled, deeply impressed. You're a rare man, Harry. Harry chuckled. I don't know about that. I'm just an old fool trying to sleep with a clean conscience. When dinner was done, David insisted on paying, and then some. He slipped a thick envelope across the table. What's this? Harry asked, confused. A thank you, David replied. There's $5,000 inside. I want you to have it. Harry stared at the envelope as if it might explode. I can't take this. Yes, you can. And you will. It's nothing compared to what you did for me. But Harry pushed it back across the table. No, I don't want money for doing the right thing. David's respect for the old man grew even deeper. Then consider it an opportunity, not a reward. Use it to get yourself a room, clothes, a fresh start. Harry hesitated, his fingers hovering over the envelope. Part of him screamed to take it, to finally end the nights spent freezing on that bench. But another part of him feared it. What if it wasn't enough? What if he failed again? Finally, with a shaky breath, he picked it up. Thank you, David. Truly. You don't owe me thanks, David said softly. If anything, I owe you. As they stepped outside, the city was glowing under the warm hues of the setting sun. The streets were still busy, but Harry felt different. Lighter. Hopeful even. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a dark tunnel. It felt like a road. A road he might actually walk again. Harry, David said as they stood on the corner. I'd like to see you again. Let's meet tomorrow. There's something I want to discuss, something that could change both our lives. Harry blinked. What do you mean? David smiled mysteriously. Let's just say, I have an idea. And as Harry watched David's car disappear into the traffic, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Possibility. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, he was willing to find out. The next evening arrived with a chill in the air and a soft orange glow settling over the city. Harry sat on his familiar bench again, but this time, things felt different. He wasn't just a man watching the world rush by anymore. In his pocket was an envelope with more money than he'd seen in years. More than that, for the first time since his life had crumbled, he had something even more valuable than money. Hope. He checked the time on the cracked public clock across the street. 5 minutes to 6. David had said to meet him here, and Harry wasn't about to be late. He smoothed down his coat, still ragged, still threadbare, and brushed his beard nervously. A part of him wondered if David would even show. Maybe yesterday had been a one-time kindness, and this was just life's way of teasing him with a glimpse of something better. But then, right on time, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. David stepped out, dressed sharply in a dark gray suit, but his warm smile made him look far less intimidating than his wealth suggested. Harry, he greeted, walking toward the bench. I'm glad you came. Wouldn't miss it, Harry replied, rising to his feet. Though I'll admit, I've been curious all day. What's this about? David chuckled softly. Come with me. I'll explain everything on the way. The two men walked side by side through the bustling streets. People turned to stare. A wealthy businessman and a ragged old man walking together wasn't something you saw every day. But David didn't care, and Harry was learning not to either. After a short walk, they stopped in front of a tall glass building, modern, pristine, and buzzing with energy. The sign above the entrance read, Blackwood Enterprises. This is yours? Harry asked, eyes widening. David nodded. One of them, yes. It's the company I started 15 years ago. We design and manufacture sustainable housing solutions. Harry stared up at the building. Looks like you've done pretty well for yourself. I've been fortunate, David said. But I didn't build this alone. I had people who believed in me. People who gave me chances I didn't think I deserved. And now, he turned to Harry. I want to be that person for someone else. Before Harry could respond, David led him inside. The lobby was sleek and polished, with marble floors and glass walls that stretched to the ceiling. Harry felt wildly out of place, his boots leaving faint scuff marks on the spotless floor. They took an elevator to the top floor, where David's office overlooked the entire city. It was the kind of view that made you feel small, yet for some reason, Harry didn't feel small anymore. "Harry," David began, motioning for him to sit. "I thought a lot about you last night, about what you did, and I realized something. People like you are exactly the kind of people I want in my life. Honest, loyal, the kind of people who do what's right even when no one's watching." Harry shifted in his chair, unsure where this was going. "I appreciate that, David, but I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean," David said, leaning forward, "I want to offer you a job." Harry blinked. "A job?" "Yes, at Blackwood Enterprises." Harry laughed, not out of disrespect, but pure disbelief. "David, I'm 70 years old. I don't even have a home address. I haven't worked in over a decade. What could I possibly do here?" "Plenty," David replied without hesitation. "We run several outreach programs, shelters, housing initiatives, community partnerships. We need people who understand what those struggling are really going through. People who can speak to them, help them, guide them. You've lived that life. You'd be perfect." Harry stared at him, stunned. "You want me to help other people like me?" "Exactly." The room was silent for a moment as Harry tried to process everything. All those years on the streets, the cold nights, the hunger, the shame, had made him believe he was worthless. But now, this man was telling him that his experience mattered, that it could help someone. "I don't know what to say," Harry admitted. "Say you'll think about it," David said with a kind smile. "There's no pressure. But I believe in second chances, Harry. You gave me one yesterday by returning that bag. I'd like to give one to you." That night, Harry couldn't sleep. He'd used part of the money David gave him to rent a small room in a boarding house, for walls, a bed, and a door he could lock. It wasn't much, but it was a world away from the bench he'd called home for 7 years. Yet, as he lay there staring at the ceiling, his mind raced. A job. A real job. He hadn't had one in over a decade. Could he even do it? What if he failed? What if David regretted helping him? But then he remembered the way David had looked at him, not with pity, but with respect, and something inside him shifted. Maybe this was his chance. Maybe this was the moment to stop surviving and start living again. The next morning, Harry walked into Blackwood Enterprises again, this time with his head held a little higher. David was waiting in the lobby, a proud smile on his face. "I was hoping you'd come," he said. Harry nodded. "I thought about it all night. And, if the offer's still open, I'd like to try." David extended his hand. "Welcome to the team, Harry." When Harry shook his hand, it wasn't just a handshake. It was a promise. A promise of change, of redemption, of new beginnings. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. At first, Harry struggled. The office felt overwhelming, the routines unfamiliar. He stumbled over emails, forgot names, and felt clumsy in meetings. But David was patient. The team was supportive. And slowly, Harry found his footing. He started visiting shelters, speaking to people who were where he once was. He listened to their stories, offered advice, connected them with resources. He helped them find hope, because he understood their hopelessness. And word spread. Soon, people were requesting to speak with Harry directly. They trusted him in a way they didn't trust anyone else. He wasn't just an employee. He was a bridge between two worlds. Every evening, as he walked back to his small rented room, Harry felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Pride. One evening, a few weeks into his new job, David called Harry into his office. "I wanted to show you something," he said, handing Harry a file. "It's a proposal for a new community housing project, and I'd like you to be the program's coordinator." Harry blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you," David said with a grin. "You have the heart and the experience. I trust you with this." Harry's hands trembled as he held the file. He had gone from sleeping on a bench to coordinating a project that could change hundreds of lives. It was overwhelming, but it felt right. "You really believe I can do this?" he asked. "I don't just believe it," David said. "I know it." The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Harry's small rented room, painting the faded wallpaper gold. For the first time in years, he woke up not because the cold had seeped into his bones, not because of the noise of traffic or strangers' footsteps, but because he had somewhere to be, somewhere he mattered. Harry buttoned the new shirt he'd bought, secondhand but neat, and looked at himself in the cracked mirror. The man staring back wasn't the same one who had been sleeping on a park bench just weeks ago. He still had the same wrinkled face and weathered eyes, but now those eyes had a spark, a quiet strength, a sense of purpose. When he arrived at Blackwood Enterprises, the receptionist greeted him by name. "Good morning, Mr. Harry," she said with a warm smile. That simple greeting, something most people took for granted, made his chest swell with pride every single time. Today was special. It was the launch meeting for the New Dawn Housing Initiative, the community project David had entrusted him to lead. The goal was simple but powerful: build safe, affordable housing for people without homes, and offer them support programs to rebuild their lives. Harry stood at the head of the conference table, papers trembling slightly in his hands. Around him sat a team of young professionals, architects, social workers, outreach coordinators. They were all looking to him for direction. "All right," he began, clearing his throat. "Thank you all for being here. I know I'm not the most conventional project lead, but I do know what it's like to be on the other side of this problem. So, if we're going to build homes, let's build them right. Let's build them with dignity." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, people nodded. One of the architects raised his hand. "Harry, what do you think is the most important feature for these homes?" "Security," Harry said immediately. "Not just locks and walls, but a place where people feel safe. After years on the streets, you stop trusting the world. A home should change that." The team scribbled notes, and as the meeting went on, Harry's confidence grew. His voice stopped trembling. His ideas flowed. He wasn't just part of the project, he was leading it. Over the next few months, Harry poured himself into the work. He visited shelters, spoke to dozens of homeless individuals, listened to their needs, and brought those insights back to the team. Slowly, brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint, New Dawn started to take shape. But something else was changing too. Harry himself. He'd started saving money. He'd bought new clothes. He even reconnected with his younger sister, whom he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. She cried when he called. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. "I was," Harry said softly, "but I'm finding my way back." David watched all of this quietly, his heart swelling with pride. He had known from the start that Harry was special, but even he hadn't anticipated just how far the old man would go once given a chance. One evening, after a long day of site inspections, David invited Harry out for dinner. This time, they weren't just two strangers from different worlds. They were partners, friends. "Do you realize what you've done?" David asked as they sat at a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. "The first phase of New Dawn is almost complete. 40 families will have homes by the end of the year." "That's your work, Harry." Harry shook his head humbly. "It's our work, David. I couldn't have done any of this without you." David smiled. "Maybe, but I couldn't have done it without you either." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip below the skyline. Harry felt a warmth he hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't the food or the view, it was belonging. Purpose. Life had given him a second chance, and he was determined not to waste it. But the journey wasn't without challenges. One afternoon, Harry visited a shelter to speak with some of the residents. A young man, barely 20, sneered at him. "Easy for you to talk about hope," the man spat. "You work for a rich guy now? You don't know what it's like out here." Harry's heart ached. "You're wrong," he said gently. "I do know. I was out here for 7 years." The young man laughed bitterly. "Yeah? And look at you now. Some of us don't get lucky." Harry knelt down beside him. "It's not luck," he said softly. "It's choices. Hard ones. I chose to return a bag that could have changed my life because it wasn't mine. I chose to accept help when it was offered. And I'm choosing to help you now, because I believe you can change your life too." The man didn't respond, but his eyes softened. Weeks later, Harry saw him again, this time filling out job applications in the shelter's resource center. It was a small victory, but it reminded Harry why he did what he did. Months passed, and New Dawn was finally ready. The opening ceremony was a modest affair. No red carpets, no fancy speeches. Just families walking into homes they could finally call their own. Children laughed as they ran through freshly painted hallways. Mothers cried tears of relief. Fathers hugged their kids tighter. Harry stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching it all unfold. David joined him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You did this," David said. "No," Harry whispered, his eyes glistening. "We did this. And they did too. Every single one of them." David smiled. "How does it feel?" Harry took a deep breath. "Like I've been walking in the dark for years, and I finally see the sunrise." That evening, after the ceremony, Harry walked back to the park bench where it had all begun. It was empty now, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. He sat down, running his hands over the worn wood. This bench had once been his home, his prison, his whole world. Now, it was just a memory. "Thank you," he whispered. Harry visited a shelter to speak with some of the residents. A young man, barely 20, sneered at him. "Easy for you to talk about hope," the man spat. "You work for a rich guy now? You don't know what it's like out here." Harry's heart ached. "You're wrong," he said gently. "I do know. I was out here for 7 years." The young man laughed bitterly. "Yeah? And look at you now. Some of us don't get lucky." Harry knelt down beside him. "It's not luck," he said softly. "It's choices. Hard ones. I chose to return a bag that could have changed my life because it wasn't mine. I chose to accept help when it was offered. And I'm choosing to help you now, because I believe you can change your life too." The man didn't respond, but his eyes softened. Weeks later, Harry saw him again, this time filling out job applications in the shelter's resource center. It was a small victory, but it reminded Harry why he did what he did. Months passed, and New Dawn was finally ready. The opening ceremony was a modest affair. No red carpets, no fancy speeches. Just families walking into homes they could finally call their own. Children laughed as they ran through freshly painted hallways. Mothers cried tears of relief. Fathers hugged their kids tighter. Harry stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching it all unfold. David joined him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You did this," David said. "No," Harry whispered, his eyes glistening. "We did this. And they did too. Every single one of them." David smiled. "How does it feel?" Harry took a deep breath. "Like I've been walking in the dark for years, and I finally see the sunrise." That evening, after the ceremony, Harry walked back to the park bench where it had all begun. It was empty now, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. He sat down, running his hands over the worn wood. This bench had once been his home, his prison, his whole world. Now, it was just a memory. "Thank you," he whispered. Into the wind, to the universe, to fate, to whoever had guided that bag to land at his feet. He pulled out a small notebook and began to write. Not plans or schedules, but dreams, ideas. The next phase of New Dawn. Outreach programs for youth. Job training initiatives. He wasn't done yet. Not even close. Later that night, David called him. "Harry, I've been thinking," he said. "I want to expand New Dawn, make it national. And I want you to be the director." Harry nearly dropped the phone. "Director?" "David, I'm not." "You are," David interrupted firmly. "You've proven yourself 100 times over. You have the heart, the experience, and the trust of the people we're trying to help. I can't think of anyone better." Tears welled in Harry's eyes. He had gone from invisible to irreplaceable, from forgotten to essential. "All right," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Let's do it." And just like that, the man who once had nothing, no home, no hope, no future, was now building a future for others. The wind carried the faint scent of spring through the city's streets as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in strokes of gold and rose. It had been exactly 1 year since Harry had returned that black leather bag. One simple act that had changed not just his life, but the lives of hundreds of others. Today was a special day. David and Harry were standing before a large crowd gathered at the site of the brand new New Dawn Community Center, the latest and most ambitious project yet. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and families who once slept in shelters now held keys to their own apartments. Harry adjusted his tie nervously. He still wasn't used to dressing up, still preferred his old coat and worn boots. But today wasn't about comfort. It was about purpose. It was about celebration. David stepped up to the podium first. The crowd quieted as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice carrying warmth and pride. "A year ago, I nearly lost everything. A simple mistake, a misplaced bag, could have cost my employees their salaries, their homes, their security. But that day, a man I had never met made a choice. He could have taken that money and vanished. No one would have known. But he didn't." David paused and looked directly at Harry, who stood off to the side, his hands folded humbly. "He returned it," David continued. "And in doing so, he reminded me, and all of us, that honesty, integrity, and compassion still exist in this world. That man is now the heart and soul of New Dawn. He's the reason hundreds of people will sleep under a roof tonight. He's the proof that one act of goodness can ripple through generations." The audience erupted into applause as David extended his hand. "Please welcome the man who inspires us all, Mr. Harry Thompson." The sound of his name echoed through the air. Harry hesitated for a moment before stepping up to the microphone. The applause grew louder. Some people stood. Others wiped away tears. It was overwhelming. For a man who once felt invisible, this was almost too much. Thank you," Harry began, his voice cracking slightly. "I never thought I'd be standing here. Honestly, I never thought I'd stand anywhere again. For a long time, I believed my story was over. I thought I'd spend the rest of my days sitting on a bench, watching life pass me by." He paused, scanning the crowd. Faces of every age and background looked back at him, waiting on his words. "But then something happened," he continued. "Life gave me a second chance, disguised as a simple choice. A bag full of money. I could have kept it. Believe me, I thought about it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't mine. And that choice, that moment, changed everything." Harry's eyes drifted toward David. "Because when you choose to do what's right, you never know who's watching. You never know what doors might open. David didn't just reward me. He believed in me. He gave me a chance to build something bigger than myself." He gestured toward the new buildings behind him. "And now here we are. Homes for the homeless. Jobs for the unemployed. Hope for the hopeless. All of this, started with one small act of honesty." The crowd erupted again, clapping and cheering. Harry felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I guess what I'm trying to say is this," he finished. "We all make mistakes. We all fall down. But we are never beyond redemption. No matter how far we've fallen, there's always a way back, and sometimes it starts with just one good choice." After the ceremony, Harry wandered through the new community center. It was beautiful, bright walls, warm lighting, spaces designed with love and care. Children played in the courtyard. Families unpacked boxes in their new apartments. Volunteers handed out welcome kits with smiles. "Looks good, doesn't it?" David said, walking up beside him. "Better than good," Harry replied. "It's perfect." David clapped a hand on his shoulder. On the bench, gazing up at the evening sky. It was strange. The very place that once symbolized his lowest point now reminded him of how far he'd come. 1 year later, the Harry Thompson Foundation was established, a global organization dedicated to ending homelessness through housing, education, and employment opportunities. Harry served as its founder and director, though he always introduced himself simply as Harry. And every time he spoke at events, he ended with the same message. Honesty doesn't cost you anything, but it can change everything. On a quiet spring evening many years later, Harry stood once more on that same bench corner, watching the city he had once been invisible in. Now, people waved when they passed. Children called out his name. And beside him stood David, not just a friend now, but a brother. "Can you believe all this started with a bag on the ground?" David asked with a laugh. Harry smiled. Funny how life works. Sometimes, the smallest choices write the biggest chapters. They stood there in silence, two men who had come from very different worlds, now bound together by fate, choice, and friendship. And as the city lights flickered to life and the evening breeze brushed against his skin, Harry felt nothing but peace. He had lived a hard life, but a meaningful one. He had stumbled and fallen, but he had risen higher than he'd ever dreamed. And it had all begun with a decision, a simple, honest choice on a cold evening on a lonely park bench. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.